So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand atheist and agnostic.
You can jiggle your leg all you fucking want.
Oh, good.
It is our second episode of the new year. We started off with a bang with Frank McMahon. Great interview to start the year. And now we're going to do something. I feel like we haven't done this in a long time, Preston.
We're looking at a new religion.
Like a new religion. Well, it's an old religion, but we're doing sort of the throwback to
We're introducing a religion we haven't previously introduced.
On today's episode of
The Holy Watermelon Podcast.
Yeah. My dad used to throw this one out as like a joke, but because it is kind of obscure. Zoroastrianism.
Tell me more about your dad throwing it out as a joke.
I don't know, just like kind of like the woo-woo would be like Zoroastrianism. I can't remember specific context, but that's how I first heard about it.
I'm pretty sure I first became aware of Zoroastrianism as a 13, maybe 12-year-old. I remember when we were told, pick out the patch that marks your religion for the Boy Scout group. And you'd see this dude riding an eagle sideways.
And you'd be like, I don't know what religion that is, but I want to be part of it.
Right. Well, and at the time, like I was getting way into Egyptology and all that stuff, or had been for a little while, really. And so I see this eagle that very much matches the Egyptian style, or like not perfectly, but really close, with a dude on it. So I'm like, yeah, this calls to me.
My fucking religion, yeah.
Instead, I got Bugle Boy Moroni.
Over the Christmas holidays, I was asked twice about our temple here. They said, "What?" I had two people say, "What is that building there?" And I said, "It's the Mormon temple." I had to explain. They were like, "Who's on top?" The angel Moroni.
Wow. I feel like somewhere nearby we must have a Zoroastrian temple. There's just shy of 200 of those temples of fire around the globe. Yeah.
So Preston's going to Google that, and I'm going to start talking about I'm going to say air quotes, founder, Zarathustra, also known as Zoroaster, but I'll get to that. So Zarathustra is the primary mythological figure of the ancient Persian tradition, who was probably a real guy, and he was born at least 3,000 years ago. Where this gets confusing is that we don't actually have any real record of Zarathustra.
It looks like, on a quick Googling, the nearest to us is in Burnaby, British Columbia. All
right. Well, with all the information we've given you over the years, you probably know where we live now, audience. But triangulate Burnaby and...
With this one data point, obviously we're going to triangulate it down.
Frank McMahon said where we live. So, anyway.
We have identified the city where we live several times.
Though we try not to. Anyway, so Zarathustra, probably real, born at least 3,000 years ago. When Xerxes invaded Greece in about 480 BC, people said that he, being Zarathustra, was born 6,000 years before that. Others say he was a contemporary of Xerxes and present at the Xerxes invasion.
So that's quite the disparity.
Yeah, that's a pretty big... It's like people who think dinosaurs roam the earth with people. That's a pretty big disparity, too.
Yeah. Hermodorus, quoted by Diogenes, believed that he lived 5,000 years before the Trojan War. And then, of course, we have Suda, the Byzantine encyclopedist, who said that it was only 500 years before the Trojan War.
And then there are some Zoroastrian sources that say specifically that he lived 258 years before Alexander the Great. So
we have no idea when he lived, and that makes it really complicated to say for sure that he was a real person.
Lived, yes. So as I mentioned, the name Zoroaster is used sometimes coming from the Old Greek transliteration of the name, and from that we get the word Zoroastrian.
So this Zoroaster name in Greek means undiluted star, but it is...
I guess aster, astronomy, astronomical. Yeah, okay.
The Persian Avestan name is a lot less clear and obvious. Ustra is almost universally agreed among people who understand this language to mean camel. The first half is the part that gives us a lot of trouble. Is it angry? Is it just a herder? What's going on? The moral to pull out of the value of this mysterious name is that he was probably the son of a camel herder and likely was himself as well.
Okay.
There's loads and loads of scholarship just on the man's name alone. And if you want to look it up, Google is going to get you there for at least a start.
So besides the name and the birth range.
Before Christians became a problem.
Almost nothing, shocking, is known about Zarathustra. And the stories that we have placed them in historical context are dubious, potentially constructed, as was the historically popular literary practice for legendary heroes, is placing them into these great stories.
It's like placing King Ramses of Egypt, the pharaoh, into the story of the Exodus.
I mean, it's even, and we've talked about this over the last bazillion years, 3 years, of there being Christ figures pre-Jesus. We're taking these attributes and placing them into the first century.
This is definitely a different traditional literature thing. But yeah, we absolutely will take the aspirations of humanity and put them on our messianic figures. So you will see that throughout history, throughout religious traditions around the world. So some Christians, likely beginning with the 17th century German Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, think that this guy, Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, is the biblical Ham, son of Noah. And then other Jesuits, like the French Joachim Bouvet, thought that Zoro was the biblical Enoch, and also Hermes Trismegistus.
Which we know Hermes Trismegistus is a amalgamation.
Yeah.
So
an amalgamation of already fictitious people.
So that one I believe, if belief is the right word there, as an origin story, I guess.
Yeah. So we really just don't know enough about this person. And the stories that we have that place him in any historical context are dubious. But maybe he probably was a real person at some point. Whether he was even known by this name actually feels unlikely.
What is that term called?
Which term?
Where we think like Zeus was a real person.
Oh, euhemerism.
Euhemerism.
We're going to talk a lot more about euhemerism this spring too.
Okay. Thank you, Preston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea that this behind these gods is a real human being. The problem with Zoroaster is similar, but different, is that he's been mythologized to the point that it's really hard to suss out any real identity underneath.
And obviously old enough that even like Jesus, there aren't a lot of records.
Yeah.
Period. Let alone reliable records.
But I did find a story that I thought was kind of interesting. So, story time.
I love Preston's story time.
So this story is called the Cypress of Kashmar. Legend has it that Zarathustra brought a cypress branch from paradise and planted it in Kashmar to celebrate the conversion of King Vashtapa to his new religion, Zoroastrianism. Not that it was really known by his own personal name at the time, but it was the true faith given to him by the gods. Talk more about that later. Alternatively, the tree was planted by King Vashtapa, celebrating the gift of this new knowledge. The tree is said to have grown to be impossibly enormous while maintaining unspeakable beauty. Wow. So, of course, the tree had to be chopped down at the command of Al-Mutawakkil, the 10th Abbasid Caliph, in 861 CE, to be carried across the territory to Samarra to be used as timber for his new palace.
No. That's bad.
Right? Not the sort of thing that makes you popular as a ruler. Big dick move for a king, though.
Yeah.
Protesters offered him huge bags of money to keep him from destroying the tree, but he could not be dissuaded, so he was murdered by a Turkic soldier. A lot of people think that maybe this soldier was working for the son of Al-Mutawakkil, but hard to say for sure. And so he never even got to see the timbers arrive. He was killed before the construction could even begin.
You get what you get, and you don't get upset.
Sometimes you get knifed.
And you don't get upset. We haven't really mentioned it, and we kind of have it dispersed to our notes, but I feel like we should mention it now, is that this is religion that started in what is now modern-day Iran.
Yes.
And it still is very obviously prominent in Iran.
So I know at the beginning of our entire journey through this Holy Watermelon podcast, we talked about the discussion of Eastern and Western religions. Yes. And how literally all of the major religions definitely should be counted as Eastern.
I mean, I guess it's east of what?
Right. That's the trick.
Yeah.
And so Iran is east of Jerusalem.
Palestine,
which is enough to... I mean, Jerusalem is basically the home of what we call the Western religions.
Right.
But this is what I feel like it belongs in the Western religions category rather than Eastern when given that framework.
I'm considering how far east we eventually go with the Eastern religions. I wouldn't disagree. Yeah. So the start of Zoroastrianism is a bit nebulous because we don't know when or if this guy ever existed. But the oldest records of Zoroastrianism date back to the 5th century BCE.
So we're looking at approximately and a little bit after the time when, for the popular culture references, we'll say the Babylonian exile of the Israelites. The most solid records we have are after that exile begins.
Yes. It doesn't mean they didn't exist, but that's where records start.
Yeah,
so.
They were not a popular religion in the Babylonian area during the time of Zoroaster or for a while after. But eventually it was picked up as the imperial religion.
Mm-hmm. And so this first mention of it was by Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote the histories. And he mentions that the Magi, which are Zoroastrian priests, were a tribe of now ancient Iranian people, as opposed to a contemporary Iranian people.
Right. Yeah, so the story that we have in the Christian Bible, I don't love how often we keep falling back onto that for reference, but that's what we've got.
They're same area, same time.
So the story that we have in Matthew of the 3 wise men, or the 3 kings in English poetry for some very weird reason. We 3 kings of Orient are those guys, who we have no reason to think they were actually kings. The actual biblical text calls them magicians or magi. And so most people who are trying to map this onto real historical events expect them to be Zoroastrian priests.
Well, and then, the song, We 3 Kings of Orient, are meaning from the East. I think it's an interesting reference. I know we don't want to be on the Christian vein of thought too much in this episode, but I do think it's, you just hear the term Magi as a kid growing up in North America, and you just, okay, the Magi, wise men, kings, they're all synonymous, and you're like, oh no, they're actually Zoroastrian priests. That's pretty fucking cool.
Right. Yeah, unless you read a lot of fantasy material where you would recognize that these people would have been counted as wizards by anybody outside of their organization.
I prefer wizards, but
I think it's cool.
Brian saw a meme that said that it was like Gandalf comes to Earth and says it's pronounced Jandalf and then immediately disappears. And I was like, don't like that. Jandalf.
The Maggie.
The Maggie. So, Preston, what do Zoroastrians actually believe in?
So, as always, there's nuance, there's layers. Different things are more important to some people than others. But let's get right into it. Even the type of religion is debated, but...
I saw 3 different labels attributed to it, and I was like, I don't know what I think.
Yeah, some people say it's firmly monotheistic. It's more complicated than that, but that's true of Christianity too. A lot of things in this cosmological framework don't really seem to fit.
As monotheistic?
Yeah. There's a lot of dualism. There's the 2 sons of the great God, one being good, one is evil. So the god of wisdom backs the good one and not the evil one. And so dualism is hugely important here. And that kind of messes with monotheism a little bit because subordinate deities. Yeah.
And the framework, which we'll get into, is that they are in an eternal struggle.
Yeah.
So it's not just, I mean, I guess Christianity has Satan too, but like the whole entire point of Zoroastrianism is this internal struggle, or eternal struggle, excuse me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So categorizing is hard. Is it polytheistic? Doesn't feel like it really ought to be.
Wait till we get, because we'll get there. But
because there's things that complicate this idea too.
And because these archangels, which I don't mean to jump ahead, have their own festivals and months and their own worship, that feels pretty polytheistic.
Well, not all Christians. Imperial tradition Christians who worry about saints also have feast days for archangels.
All right, well.
St. Michael's Day, for example.
St. Bernard's Day, more importantly.
Oh, he wasn't an angel, though. He was a saint.
Oh.
Similar.
Okay.
So very similar, but different.
Okay. I just like a good milkshake.
Right? Same. All right. So there are, of course, books. We did a whole series on books a little while back. The Avesta is one of the main texts that we're concerned about here. It outlines the most important beliefs of Zoroastrianism, and it's said to be written by Zarathustra himself. Very, very nice. And these segments, these texts, are called the Gathas, and they're written in a form of poetry.
Nice. Within the Avesta, there's also the Yanas, which are the principal acts of worship. This liturgical text has an emphasis on the protection of nature and the base elements of earth, wind, fire, and water.
Ooh, sounds a little Greek.
Maybe the Greeks stole.
So the Greeks and the Persians definitely had a lot of ideas crossed between them, not just pointy sticks.
All right.
Because there was a lot of conflict between these nations.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah. The most basic daily consideration for Zoroastrians is the concept of Asha and Druj, or Nasu. Asha is a complex word. Having studied this a little bit, it feels like the best way to translate it would be onto the Greek word ortho, which we usually end up translating as right in English, but there's a lot more nuance to it. This noun encompasses all that is orderly, proper, correct, true, good, and righteous. So you could say good, or what is like morally right.
Good.
But it's more complex than just right. It's tricky. Words are hard sometimes. And conversely, we have Druj, which means demoness, like a feminine demon.
Okay.
Or more broadly, falsehood. Nice opposite to the true and right of Asha. And then, alternative to the word Druj, sometimes you'll see Nasu or Nasa. It means corpse, or more broadly, death in general. So this conflict between what is right and what is wrong and decrepit and poisonous. And so there's this conflict between good and evil in these terms.
Perfect. I got really excited, Preston.
Tell me more.
Well, there's the core tenets of Zoroastrianism, which we'll get into. But the first one is the threefold path of Asha, and you know how much I love numbered beliefs.
Right.
So I was really excited. We haven't had a numbered belief in a long time. So the threefold path of Asha is Humata, good thoughts, Hukta, good words, and Huvartha, good deeds.
I like
And that's what you spend your day thinking about and doing.
thinking good things, saying good things, doing good things.
Perfection.
I mean, that's a pretty solid set of rules to give yourself. Of course, there's going to be some nuance and exhaustive texts on what that really means. But in the basics, it's pretty hard to argue with.
And the other core tenets kind of fall into that. So charity, this keeps you in alignment with Asha and spreads happiness.
I like it.
Being good for the sake of goodness without reward.
Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm. And spiritual equality and duty for men and women.
This feels
straightforward.
Well, I want to say it feels a little dharmic.
Yeah.
So Persia, I mean, it's not exactly like right up neighbors against India, but pretty close.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is a little bit of transmission of thought there.
If they started around the same time.
Well, I mean,
if not
both of these, we have no idea how far back they really go.
Right.
Thousands of years into time immemorial.
Yeah. Some people say this is the oldest religion still practiced today. So.
I mean, it's really hard to defend that, but I can't say that it's not true either.
Well,
I don't know.
We know burden of proof, not on us for this.
Right?
So
we just read what other scholars have written and digest it for you, our faithful listeners.
So one thing that I was really interested about in Zoroastrianism is that he's not the guy. Like
No.
he is, but he's not the guy.
He's like, well, I'm going to say he's like a Moses or a Muhammad, where he's the messenger, not the one to be worshipped.
Yeah, so even though the name's Zoroastrianism, it has nothing to do, well, I should say it has nothing to do with Zoroaster, but he is not the supreme.
Right. Well, it's like when for so long we referred to Islam as Mohammedism, and people who followed Muhammad as Mohammedans. Oh yeah, not like you and me, but
No,
like
I know. That's why it's historical.
the English-speaking population.
I don't like that.
No, it feels really weird.
It does.
And there's a reason we eventually moved away from that. I am waiting for somebody to come up and say, hey guys, we have a much better word than Zoroastrianism.
I did see the term Mazdaism, thinking of the car, and I can see that.
Yeah. Like worshiping Ahura Mazda. Yeah. Mazdaism feels better.
Yes. So
Has that caught on?
no,
It doesn't look like it's caught
I
on
literally thought in one
academically.
instance. So Ahura Mazda, as Preston just name dropped him, is the guy. He's the supreme deity, which would be in the monotheistic context, the guy. It translates to wise lord or lord of wisdom.
So Mazdaism really would mean a religion of wisdom.
But we'll see.
It is very dualistic, but I mean, so is Christianity, and so is a lot of expressions of Islam and Judaism.
Hop into our Discord and let us know if you think what category this fits out best under.
So the question would be, is dualism incompatible with monotheism? That's where you're going to get your arguments.
Okay, well. We can have that debate at the end of the episode. So according to Zarathustra, Ahura Mazda created the universe, and twin spirits Spenta Manu, light, truth, and life, and Agramanu. Also, I found the name Ahriman for Agramanu, which is deceit, darkness, and death. Yes. These two spirits reflect the choices between good and evil that make up the history of the world. Every choice anyone's ever made comes back to these two.
All right. And of course, Ahura Mazda has made an ally of one of these two sons, not the other.
He definitely has a favorite kid. It is Spenta Manu, not Agramanu.
I mean, if one of my sons keeps trying to burn my house down, and the other one is like, no, just keep the eternal flame alive and keep the fire there only, yeah, I'm going to have a favorite.
Okay, well.
All right, story time.
Preston story time.
So when Zoro was 30, on his way to collect water for a sacred ritual, and while I was looking this up, had no idea what religion he was practicing before this.
Okay.
Probably the existing state religion of Babylon. I don't know. He was visited by Vohu Mana, one of the Amesha Spenta, the archangels. Vohu led Zoro to the heavenly court of Ahura Mazda, where he learned from the Lord of Wisdom the principles of the good religion. And that's all he knew it as, was the good religion. Having such a great experience, Zoroaster believed that he was called by God to spread this gospel. He told anyone who would listen that the source of all goodness was Ahura Mazda, who should be worshipped, and that this Lord of Wisdom created spirits called Yazatas to help preserve this order. Zoro was also bold enough to tell people that some of the Persian gods were devas, who should absolutely not be worshipped. They are the creations of Angra Mainyu, who was an evil destroyer, as opposed to Shiva, an amoral destroyer of the neighboring Hindu tradition. Angra Mainyu is the fountain from which all evil bursts, the source of all human misery. Zoro enlisted the aid of everyone who would listen to the urgently necessary support of Ahura Mazda in the cosmic conflict against evil. While Ahura Mazda is superior to Angra Mainyu, the weight of human evil and apathy is enough to tip the scales if left unchecked. So Zoro didn't get very popular with this gospel, but after he died, it did slowly start to catch on. And there's a long time between his death and the adoption of this religion as the state religion.
It happens to the best of us.
Right? Jesus had to wait 300 years after he died before it was adopted as the imperial religion.
Preston mentioned the Amesha Spenta in these archangels, and so this is where I think it gets a little polytheistic. These are 7 divine beings that emanate from Ahura Mazda and help him rule all of creation. The name Amesha Spenta does not appear in the Avesta, but appears in other Persian texts and Zoroastrian cosmological texts. They are worshipped separately and have their own month and festival attributed to each of them.
Well, lucky guys.
You want to start with Vohumana, the one you mentioned?
All right, so Vohumana is the first one who showed up to visit Zoroaster, and he represents wisdom, the right hand of Ahura Mazda. Remember, Mazda means wisdom. So this guy's place is very securely held.
Yes. Then we have Asha Vahishta, and this one represents truth and justice, universal law, and righteousness.
Well, it's right in his name, Asha. I like it.
Some of these are women, and I didn't make a distinction.
Uh-oh.
I think Asha might. No, I think Asha's a man. Sorry.
Okay. The next is Chhatra Vairya. This is the archangel of self-control and the power to choose peace. Yeah, free will is really important in this. I don't think we've said that yet. Free will is a very important thing in this whole cosmological thing. We have to choose good over evil.
Yes. This one is a lady, and her name's easy to say. Heck yes, is Spenta Armaiti. She represents serenity, devotion, fertility, obedience, humility, and she is the daughter of Ahura Mazda, which was pointed out, and I thought was interesting because they all come from him. But that was the one they said, this is his daughter.
Emanate is a weird word, but whatever.
That's my emanating noise. I mean, people can't see my emanating action, so just give me emanating noise.
All right. And then we've got Harvatat, who presides over water and represents perfection, health, and prosperity.
Then we have Ameritat, and this archangel is associated with plants and immortality.
And then, of course, Spenta Mainyu, the spirit of Ahura Mazda that represents light and goodness.
Which I also thought was interesting because I saw that there were 7, and then I kept seeing lists that were only 6, and I found out that there's this 7th one that is Ahura Mazda.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have a hard time defining what the Holy Spirit is in Christianity, too. And I feel like there's kind of a similarity in here.
Yep. One of the other, I guess, biggest practices within Zoroastrianism is the Yasna ceremony. So as I mentioned, part of the Avesta has the Yasnas, the liturgical text. And so the ceremony is a daily recitation of the Yasnas to increase Asha, so that threefold goodness, and strengthen Ahura Mazda in his fight against Angra Mainyu.
I like it. Not only does this God need the support of all of humanity to fight evil, but he also needs our prayers to strengthen him directly in this fight.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
It's certainly interesting.
It's more involved.
It is.
It gives, I guess it kind of comes back to that idea of like self-control and choice. Like, are you choosing to help him? Because in the West Iron traditions, in Judeo-Christian tradition, like he's all powerful, whether you participate or not.
Right.
God's going to do what God's going to do. JC's going to do what JC's going to do.
Right.
The Yasna ceremony builds up to the Abzor, the strengthening of waters. Parahoma is the consecrated liquid made from the Homa plant. We don't have home here, so I don't know what that is.
I think we import it. Specifically to
For this, yeah, I just
Temple
don't
of
know
Fire,
what it is what I'm saying. It has consecrated water added to it. So it symbolizes the returning of life to the water or repairing the damage done to water by humans, remembering that those base elements in nature is super important in Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, water's always around, the ground is always around, the air is always around. Fire's the one that we got to keep alive at the temple all the time. Very important.
And we damage water consistently.
Yeah.
Not that we don't damage air or earth, but
water is one of those things that we actively need to consume constantly through the day. Less often than air, but also we are way more... We're putting a lot more effort into really screwing water up.
Yeah, and we're more adaptable to we live in a big city. Plotting's on the map, right? It's not like we don't have, smog, but you don't die.
Right.
I mean, it's probably bad long term, but you can't drink tainted water.
Right. Hurts you right away.
That's how you get dysentery. Oh no, Joseph Smith is getting sick.
So purity, big important thing. Fire and water are seen as purifiers in this tradition. And so, like we mentioned before, a bunch of temples. There are 167 Zoroastrian fire temples worldwide, and they each preserve an eternal flame. Which reminds me, slightly off topic, somebody put out the eternal flame in Moscow a little while ago. Teens just being dicks.
Hate teens.
The Kremlin says they were exiled from the country.
Wow.
It seems really unlikely. I think they were probably killed.
Wow. I feel like exile is bad enough, but...
I think exile is the explanation the public got for why they aren't seen anymore, when in fact they were just killed for putting out the eternal flame.
Wow.
But it's on video. You can see them doing it, and it's ridiculous.
I hate that I'm becoming this person that's like those young whippersnappers. But what was it recently in Europe? Some teens defaced some old-ass building that has been around for centuries. And it's like, come on, kids. Don't put out eternal flames. Don't deface historical buildings.
Right? Kind of a big deal.
If you follow those 2 rules in life, you should probably add some more, but you'll be pretty solid if you follow those 2.
Sure. All right. So 167 fire temples around the world. The Temple of Yazd in Iran has the longest burning fire, which was started over 1,500 years ago.
That's wild.
Right? Now,
That's wild.
The real question. Now, I'm not saying this is what happened, but if it were to go out for lack of care, because people on duty were just not being careful enough, and they just relit it, would they tell us?
No. Gosh, no, that's your job. I wouldn't tell.
Right?
And what determines it going out? If you still got embers and some crackling, you're like, oh, fuck. You could bring it back.
You could, yeah.
If it's cold.
If all you got to do is blow on it for the fire to come back,
you're good.
I think you could argue that it never really went out. No. But if you have to light a match.
Cold, if you can stick your hand in it.
Oh, then it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah. If you got to light a match to bring it back, it was gone for sure.
So these fires are maintained at least 5 times a day, probably more. I mean, my husband maintains our fireplace probably 5 times an hour, but he also likes fire. And prayers are recited 5 times a day when this is happening. Obviously, if it needs to be maintained more, but during 5 of the maintenances, prayers are said.
Right, which feels a little bit like many of the neighboring peoples of Islamic traditions, 5 daily prayers. So Zoroastrianism does continue today, mostly home in Iran and northern India. There's, according to the statistics we've got, only about 120,000 Zoroastrians in the world.
Still twice as many as Scientologists.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good news.
I know.
All right.
Sorry.
So there are, as in many traditions we've talked about, some splits. There's different traditions within the broader tradition. It's not as diverse as, say, Christianity.
As Preston says, it's not monolithic.
Right. We've got traditionalists and reformists.
And then a smattering of others.
Yeah.
That would say they don't fit into either, but
Yeah.
just like any religion.
The traditionalists are a lot more like the Druze or the Hutterites. They really don't have any interest in people converting to their faith. You just kind of have to be born into it, and hopefully you'll stay faithful rather than accepting converts. Reformists are a little bit more okay with converts, and they're really interested in a return to the original nature-protecting teachings and treat it more as a philosophy than a religion of, yeah, let's live the good life and worry a little bit less about the identity of who is God. So there are some pretty interesting footprints from Zoroastrianism that you'll see in other religions.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be arguments on the nature of this connection and the depth of this connection as well. But for sure, Judaism changed a lot from the decades leading into the Babylonian exile to the time that they returned from that exile. There wasn't before much talk about any cosmic duality conflict. You had a God who created everything and was responsible for all the good and all the bad. You can find that in the old prophets, that God is responsible for good and bad. Modern Judaism talks about that a little bit less, and the Christians really ran with this idea of Satan that's not just the accuser in the heavenly courts, but an actual enemy to God, unwelcome in courts.
Actively
trying to destroy humanity.
Yeah.
In fact, that duality of heaven and hell as a reward and punishment does come from the Zoroastrian tradition. It didn't really feel at home in the early Judaism, and it still doesn't really feel at home in modern Judaism either. But it's there a little bit, depending on who you talk to. And of course, these hierarchies of demons and angels 100% originated with not Judaism, not Christianity, but at least this version of it that you see in popular culture comes from Zoroastrian traditions. And Islam also bears a handful of affinities with Zoroastrianism as well, just because of proximity and the influence of the Achaemenid Empire in both traditions. The way they describe the archangels, particularly Jibril and Amesha Spenta, they feel very similar. And the 5 obligatory daily prayers might have something to do with this imperial connection. I don't feel like it really is monotheistic. There is a primary God, and I think it's exactly as monotheistic as Hinduism is.
So not at all?
Yes.
But is
Not
that panentheism? Panentheism? Everything is God and God is everything?
I don't think that's the majority interpretation of
I agree,
the
because
cosmos.
God isn't in my cup.
Not in the Zoroastrianism understanding, as far as I've read anyway.
Right.
But I do suspect that there are some people who do see it that way, just because things aren't monolithic. And that idea of panentheism it's all over the place. You'll find Christians who believe that too, right? But it feels a lot more like you've got a primary God and then a lot of subordinate gods. And you could call it henotheism.
My understanding of henotheism is that there are other religions that you accept as valid, just not yours.
Well, so henotheism primarily is the idea that there is the God that you worship and there are other gods. And so, yeah, that does it does fit well when you talk about the early stages. Well, like go back 2,000 years ago when every nation had its own set of gods.
Right.
And if you were to go to somebody else's city, you would offer a sacrifice to their gods, but you certainly wouldn't take that worship with you when you left.
Right.
And so that is definitely a manifestation of henotheism. But the primary idea is that there is the God that you worship and the acknowledgement of other gods. And so here we have a God who has many children who are definitely divine, but you don't necessarily worship them, but you probably would offer prayer to them like a saint to get specific things.
Religion.
It's complicated.
We never said we picked an easy topic to talk about.
No. We do not do it because it is easy. We do it because we thought it would be easy.
I thought you were going to say we're not the hero Gotham wants, or the hero Gotham needs or deserves.
Yeah.
But sure, just tell everyone we thought it was going to be easy. What else do we need to tell the people? It is 2024. And we want to really grow the podcast this year. So if you're listening to this episode, if you can give us a rating on Apple, a 5-star rating, that helps us a lot, and share with one of your friends.
Yeah. Be sure to follow us on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and share that content that we're spreading. And I think a lot of people will appreciate that. And maybe that'll help grow our audience. Of course, you can join us on Discord. We can have some really great discussions on Discord. We certainly do with some regularity. And we can have more as more people join the conversation and, get curious and get honest with their questions.
And then
there's
if you want
money.
to take it to the next level, if you want to get to third base with me and Preston, I don't know why that's my, wow. We have 2 ways you can support the podcast financially, and that is through our Spreadshirt shop. Where you can buy our merch, or you can check us out on Patreon, where we do early release and bonus episodes for a small monthly fee.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us and joining this new year as we begin our 5th year of this podcast.
Wow, 5th calendar year.
Yeah. It's exciting.
It is exciting.
Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.